My son, Ames, had become a shadow of the man I raised since he purchased his secluded estate. A high-level cybersecurity expert who usually lived by cold logic and hard data, he had developed an unsettling edge that didn't fit his personality. I had planned to spend my retirement years finally bonding with him, but instead of warmth, I found a house built on secrets. Dad, stay in the guest suite on the ground floor, Ames had told me while dropping my bags. His tone was casual, but his eyes kept darting toward the ceiling with a frantic, nervous energy. The upper floor is under heavy renovation. The floorboards are rotted, and the wiring is live and dangerous. Please, for your own safety, do not go upstairs. I nodded at the time, but as soon as he left the room, my gaze kept drifting toward the grand, dark staircase. During the day, the house was eerily silent, but in the dead of night, strange sounds drifted down from above. It wasn't the sound of settling wood. It was a rhythmic scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the floor, followed by a soft, frantic tapping that sounded almost like a heartbeat. One evening, Ames announced he had to leave for an urgent overnight server emergency at his firm. As soon as his car taillights disappeared down the long driveway, the silence of the house became deafening. I told myself it was just a father's instinct, that maybe there was a leak or an animal trapped. But as I placed my foot on the first step, a sudden icy chill gripped my chest. My son had warned me to stay away, but I could feel that something upstairs was waiting to be found. The stairs groaned under my weight, each creak sounding like a gunshot in the hollow silence of the house. As I reached the landing, the air grew noticeably thinner and smelled of something metallic, like old copper and ozone. The hallway was pitch black, save for a thin sliver of light bleeding from beneath a door at the very end of the corridor. This wasn't the look of a renovation zone. There were no tarps, no paint cans, and no dust. I reached the door and pressed my ear against the cold wood. The scraping sound I had heard from downstairs was louder here. It was accompanied by a low electronic hum and the rapid-fire clicking of a keyboard. My heart hammered against my ribs. Ames had said he was going to the office, yet someone or something was active in this room. I gripped the handle, expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, it clicked open. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a room that looked less like a bedroom and more like a high-tech bunker. Dozens of monitors lined the walls, their blue light bathing the room in an eerie glow. They weren't displaying code or server data. They were displaying live feeds. My breath hitched as I realized what I was looking at. The screens showed the interiors of every house on this street. I saw my neighbors sleeping, a young couple arguing in their kitchen 3 houses down, and a local bank teller counting cash in her study. But it was the center monitor that made my blood run cold. It was a high-definition feed of my own guest suite downstairs, showing the empty bed I had just climbed out of. Ames wasn't just working, he was watching everyone. As I stood there, bathed in the flickering blue light of the monitors, a realization hit me like a physical blow. Ames wasn't just a cybersecurity expert, he was a digital predator. I walked closer to the main desk, my hands trembling. Scattered across the surface were dozens of forged IDs, passports with different names but Ames's face, and a ledger filled with bank account numbers and passwords. Suddenly, a speakers on the wall crackled to life. It wasn't music or a recording. It was a voice, low, distorted, and panicked, coming from one of the live feeds. "I know someone is in here. Ames, is that you?" I spun around, looking at the screens. The voice came from a feed of a darkened basement 3 houses away. On the screen I saw an elderly woman, Our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, clutching a phone, looking terrified. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to a small black device mounted on her wall. My son wasn't just watching these people. He was interacting with them, tormenting them, playing some sick game of digital hide-and-seek. Then the center monitor, the one showing my empty bedroom downstairs, flashed red. A text box appeared on the screen, typing itself out in real time. Proximity alert. Subject Dan has breached the second floor. Initiating lockdown protocol. The heavy oak door behind me slammed shut with a mechanical thud. I rushed to it, grabbing the handle, but it was dead. I was trapped in the very room my son told me to avoid, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes. That's when the rhythmic scraping sound started again, but this time it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from right beneath my feet. The floorboards beneath the desk began to shift. A concealed hydraulic hatch slowly retracted, revealing a narrow spiral staircase leading even higher, into a hidden attic space I hadn't known existed. The scraping sound grew louder, accompanied by a heavy, labored breathing. I backed away, my eyes glued to the opening, expecting a monster. Instead, a figure emerged, but it wasn't Ames. It was a man, gaunt and pale, wearing a tattered jumpsuit with a serial number stitched onto the chest. He looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. In his hand, he clutched a heavy metal file, the source of the scraping. He looked at me with hollow, terrified eyes and whispered, "Are you the new one? Did he bring you here to replace me?" Before I could answer, the monitors in the room flickered from the neighbors' feeds to a single, high-definition shot of the driveway. Ames's car had returned. I watched on the screen as he stepped out, not with the hurried look of a man coming from a server emergency, but with a calm, predatory smile. He looked directly into the security camera at the gate and mouthed 2 words, "Hi, Dad." Panic surged through me. I realized then that the lockdown wasn't to keep me in, it was to keep me trapped until he could get here. The man from the attic grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "He's not a cybersecurity expert," the man hissed, his voice trembling. "He's a ghost broker. He steals lives, identities, and secrets, and when people get too close to the truth, he stores them. Like me, we have to get out before he reaches the door." The man's words chilled me to the bone. I wasn't looking at a son who had lost his way. I was looking at a monster who had built a business out of human misery. "How many?" I whispered, looking at the hatch. The man didn't answer. He just pulled me toward a ventilation shaft behind the server racks. "The door is electronic," he panted. "When he cuts the power to the floor to trap us, the vents are the only way to the service crawl space." Suddenly, the blue monitors flickered and died. The room was plunged into an oppressive, thick darkness. The electronic hum ceased, replaced by the heavy metallic clink of the door's deadbolt being engaged from the outside. Then, through the silence, I heard Ames's footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and echoed with a terrifying confidence. "Dad," Ames's voice projected through the room's speakers, powered by an independent backup. He sounded disappointed, like a teacher correcting a slow student. "I told you the wiring was dangerous. I told you the floor was rotted. You always had to be the hero, didn't you? Always poking around where you don't belong." I heard the sound of a keypad beeping outside the door. He was entering the code. The gaunt man pushed me into the narrow vent just as the heavy door began to hiss open. I scrambled through the cold metal tunnel, my heart hammering against the aluminum walls. As I looked back through the slats of the vent cover, I saw the silhouette of my son entering the room. He wasn't holding a weapon, he was holding a tablet. With a single swipe of his finger, a hissing sound filled the room. He was venting gas into the chamber. "Sleep now, Dad," he whispered into the dark. When you wake up, Dan will be gone, and a new subject will take your place. The acrid smell of the gas filled my lungs, and my vision began to blur. Beside me, the gaunt man was already losing consciousness. I knew if I stayed in the vent, I was a dead man. But Ames had made one fatal mistake. He thought he was the only one who knew how to use a network. Before I had left the server room, I hadn't just run. I had grabbed a small, unmarked USB drive from the main console, the one labeled Master Encryption Key. With my last bit of strength, I pulled out my phone and used a wireless adapter to plug the drive in. I didn't need to fight Ames. I just needed to bridge his private, dark network to the outside world. As the gas made my head spin, I hit upload. The lights in the house didn't just flicker, they exploded into a strobe effect. Downstairs, the front door's electronic locks screeched and retracted. Every siren in the neighborhood, triggered by the breach I had just sent to the local precinct, began to wail. I heard Ames scream in rage as his tablet turned into a brick. His entire empire was being broadcast to the federal authorities in real time. The vent cover was kicked open from the outside, not by Ames, but by a SWAT team that had been tracking the digital signal I just amplified. As I was pulled out into the fresh air, I saw Ames being tackled to the ground, his face pale with the realization that his subject had just become his judge. I looked at the scar on my chest, the one he thought made me weak, and realized it was the very thing that kept me awake long enough to finish him. The architect had built his last room, and this time the door locked from the inside.